Hey, okay. This is gonna be my third try at this. So I just end up rambling or getting lost a lot. So I'm going to try to be much more focused here. Um and hopefully not too fast in regards to that as well. But basically, here to explain primarily deck archetypes so that you know what I'm talking about when I'm explaining what I'm looking for or what I'm playing when we're talking about card games. And then if we ever get to a point where or when you try new games with me, if you kind of have a grasp of the kind of like basic generic ways to play, then maybe you could have a better idea of why you are or aren't enjoying whatever we're doing. Um, I guess it's just to give you some terminology to be able to communicate with me about this stuff um, in a more, not about constructive way, but just like more clearly. Um, and then also so that when I'm talking to you about this kind of stuff, you kind of have a maybe slightly better idea of what I'm fucking rambling about the whole time. So, uh, because this is primarily deck archetypes, I'll try not to spend too long here, but I thought there were some very basic terms that relate to most card games, pretty much anywhere that you'll find, that will just get through so that when I'm explaining different points in the timeline of a game, that this will make sense, hopefully. But we'll get to that. So basically, there's at the very fundamental level usually two resources that are kind of universal across most card games. That understanding what those terms mean will just give you a much easier time getting into something to begin with. So card advantage is just how many cards you have compared to your opponent. So obviously these are card games, right? So at a fundamental level, the only thing you're interacting with is cards. So having more will generally mean that you are in a better position. That is a little bit of an oversimplification, but I won't go into it too much. That doesn't necessarily always have to be the case, but generally speaking, just having an understanding of being able to compare the cards that you have access to compared to the cards that your opponent has access to is a good way to judge your position in the game, and then also will give you an idea of what they're trying to do as well. Sorry, I shouldn't eat while I'm doing this. Very unprofessional of me. Um, and then alongside this, most games will have some sort of the very generic term is mana because Magic uses that, and then a lot of games just kind of go into that in the meantime. Like Hearthstone also has mana. I think Runeterra probably. I think it's also called mana. Anyway, so that's probably the generic term for it. But basically, it's just any sort of fundamental resource system that is required to play cards that you have for the most part. It's just another way to limit the speed of interaction, I guess, because card games that don't have any sort of additional resource system, I think Yu-Gi-Oh is the only thing one that comes to mind, but it's kind of like a playing card game where anything that you have access to you can just play usually. Which makes the game very kind of like a playing card game. It becomes very solitary. Turns in Yu-Gi-Oh can take fucking forever because just having a card means you can play it. So then you play a card that gives you more cards, and then it just becomes a very time-consuming process because there's nothing to slow you down from engaging with your whole set of cards that you have. So most games will choose to have sort of a resource system to limit that because it's a much I don't want to say better, but it's a probably much simpler way to balance um, game effects is that a good way? I think that's I think that's the most basic explanation I can give for that. So just to recap, there's two general resources that are pretty common amongst almost all card games, and that was just how many cards you have access to at the time, and then how many you can actually play by using whatever resource system is in that game. And then just one final thing about winning the game is I will explain aggressive playstyles and controlling playstyles and that kind of thing in a sec. And so just to get the idea of how they win, in board games, I think this might be a good comparison to make. There's a lot of the time winning is based on building up resources yourself to get to a certain point, and then that becomes winning by just getting there. Not always. Like Monopoly is probably more comparable to a card game where the idea is not to build up necessarily a ton of resources for yourself. Like you can do that, but that doesn't outright win for you. It's more about reducing your opponent to having nothing. So in card games, that means either reducing how many cards they have to 0, so obviously they have nothing, so they can't play anything, or taking their health or life total or whatever, however they phrase it, some kind of health bar or like just number that they have that represents how much life you have, to 0. Yeah, basically reducing your opponent's resources to nothing instead of accumulating things for yourself is generally more important. I keep saying generally and usually because I'm thinking of like times when that's not true, but that is not going to be relevant for this discussion, so I will try to stop doing that from now on. Basically, winning is about taking your opponent's resources to 0 rather than building your resources up to like a certain point, which is relevant for this next bit where we talk about the different deck archetypes. This is the main part of this conversation. These are the 3 like I don't know about pillars maybe, but like the 3 most common and well represented archetypes across like pretty much every card game that exists. There's a little bit of mid-range as a concept that I will explain at the end, but generally speaking, it's like every deck you'll play or come across is one of these 3. And so each of them has like a different playstyle, obviously. That's why they're different archetypes. And that will affect how, like what cards you have and then how you play them and like your thought process going towards them. So the reason I think this is relevant for you is because if we are playing a game that we haven't tried before, but you know that you enjoy like more aggressive decks from something that we've played before, then maybe we'll try to put you on something here versus like, you know, if you try combo and you prefer that, like I usually am somewhere like here maybe. It just gives you a much better, like an easy way to explain what kind of play pattern you're looking for. But okay, I will explain them now. So generally, right, as the game progresses, so you know, along this axis, like time, you'll have access to more resources as it goes on. So aggro decks would generally be, I'm doing the thing again, I'm sorry. They want to play lots of little stuff, so like cheap cards that are usually aggressively like built aggressively early. Sorry, that was not okay. Usually aggro will play a bunch of cheap aggressive cards very early, and the idea is because they're playing a lot of little stuff at the start of the game that they will be very strong like in the beginning here, and because it's so early, the opponent won't have a lot of resources to be able to deal with those cards, because you know we're just here and not like here. And the idea is you play a bunch of little stuff and then hit them in the face to overwhelm them really quickly and try to just end the game outright, like quite fast. And you're banking on being strong enough early that your opponent doesn't have the resources to be able to combat that, or to play their own game plan. So I try to make these little graphs as a function of time and power. So the aggro deck will want to get strong like rather quickly, and then generally will plateau at some point, and then after this point, their aggressive minions will not become as impactful because the opponent will have enough resources to be able to deal with those. So the antithesis of this is like a control deck. So they are playing instead of trying to play to be strong at the early game here, they're trying to play to be strong at the late game here. And the idea is that you in these parts here are just trying to have cards that will interact with your opponent's cards, so that when they're strong here, you're kind of just removing their stuff and trying to stay alive and slow the game down so that you can get to this point, and then you have a bunch of like big, expensive, strong cards that you can play here, and by that time, these will be enough to completely overpower an aggressive deck's like weaker minions, right? I say minions, but just like it's cards basically. Yeah, so these are like kind of the most simple to explain. Like it's just like an opposite, right? Like you want to be strong early, you want to be strong late. So you play a lot of like cheaper cards so that you can get a bunch of them out here, and you playing bigger expensive cards so you can get them out here. That's like a pretty simple dichotomy of playing now versus playing later, and that can, if that was the only thing in a game, then I think it would be very boring, for the most part, because the way that this works is very straightforward. So then something to break that up is combo decks, and then it's not so much that they're like a hybrid of these two necessarily. The idea of a combo deck is to build your resources towards a specific point, or like to play a specific card or series of cards to either outright win the game like immediately, or set yourself up onto a board that will win the game like in 1 or 2 turns. And that is a nice like middle ground sometimes, I guess, because against a control deck, right? Because they're weak here, the combo deck wants to spend its resources gathering more card advantage or more mana to get to the combo quicker. So you become not necessarily an aggro deck, but the way that you play is much faster in this matchup. Versus here, you kind of become like a semi-control deck where you still want to get card advantage and like resources to play them, but you have to take care of your opponent's cards and like slow the game down so that you can get to that point without dying. So sometimes a combo deck can play like either of these depending on kind of which matchup they're in, but it's not it's not like you should think of this as like a middle piece. That's why it's nice that I guess the triangle is a good explanation for this. Yeah, and then mid-range is I'll just draw this graph up here actually. It tries to do something like just like this, so that you're basically trying to play like on turn 1 you play a 1-drop, turn 2 you play a 2-drop, 3-drop on turn 3, that kind of thing. Just like you try to play something every turn that kind of is like good enough for that turn, but it that kind of deck doesn't really come up very much, because generally speaking, going towards one of these corners, like being proficient at one specific thing, is better than being kind of okay at everything. Because against an aggro deck, for example, you would get overrun really quickly because your early stuff isn't as strong. And then against a control deck, like you don't really have the resources at the end to overpower theirs, because they're built much heavier than you. So like by the time you get here, you have stuff to play, but they have more. I think, I mean, this doesn't matter, but I think combo versus mid range is actually usually kind of fun. But anyway, this is probably the most interactive kind of deck. So for my personal preference, like I think interacting is better, which I don't know, hot take maybe. So like for example, right, an aggro deck generally is not going to be interacting with your opponent outside of like hitting them in the face, unless they're forced to, because you don't have the resources to sustain a long game where you have a lot of interaction back and forth. Like a lot of your resources are spent just trying to like smack your opponent. And at the point where you are like trading, it's usually like if you're trading resources, it's usually you're like here and you're like about to have a big downward spot where so you either need to like win right here, like top decks. You want to like I should explain what top deck is. It just means like the card that you draw and play is like enough to just close the game out like immediately, or you're about to start like completely running out of gas and getting overwhelmed. So for the most part, there's not a lot of interaction here. And then additionally with combo decks, because they are specifically looking for one point for the most part, like this is built towards being semi-interactive in the first place. I guess there's two ways that they can exist. There's ones where they have the ability to go fast enough that they don't have to worry about interacting at all. Like literally don't give a fuck. Just like every turn, just like drawing towards whatever I'm looking for to like execute my game plan. Like that is like the least possibly interactive card game deck, and that is just like completely horrible to play against. Like that's, if we're ranking it, that's like definitely at the bottom and then probably here. A more healthy kind of way of doing it is that it would be like a moderately interactive at both ends of activating this big power spike. And I think that's definitely more engaging when I get to the part after this of explaining the whole reason we got to this, which is like why I liked specific decks that I was playing in Hearthstone. And Control, I guess, is like the most interactive besides probably mid-range decks, but like theoretically, like here you're interacting with your opponent's early stuff, and then here you are the one playing the stuff to be interacted with. Like you're playing the big guys that have to be answered and that kind of thing. Let me get to this part. So the idea of that is pretty cool in the sense of like, if all four of these exist, it's pretty. I think it's a fun balance. I think the fact of the matter is that most of the time this kind of dies out and you move towards one of these three corners, which is like this point here, because generally speaking, Magic the Gathering is like 30 years old or something, which like is really old in my head, like for a game franchise. Like that's older than Pokemon or whatever, but that's still really young. Like when our parents were like kids, like didn't have card games, like trading card games, like at all, which is like crazy to think about to me, because I'm like, it's such a simple like concept, I guess. Like you just have cards and they do a thing and then you pretend like they're real. But like it literally didn't exist like before like 1991 or whatever. Like that's just so crazy to me. Anyway, sorry. Unrelated, but this is part of the basic history lesson, I guess. Just like the fact of the game being out for so long, and like Hearthstone is 10 years old at this point, so it's like has the same issues. And the reason I think a lot of games end up having these same issues is because Magic the Gathering is like the first game. Like a lot of things take a ton of resources, not resources. A lot of things take a ton of inspiration from it. in regards to like game design and like resource management. Uh, so a lot of the problems that a lot of the card games that come out in the last 10 years have been trying, at least from my perspective, to address the issues that this game has. Um, and like I can't vouch for how well or not they've been doing that. It's kind of more of a consensus thing, I guess. But I think it's interesting. Um, and like it's pretty fun, and that's why I've been trying to try a bunch of new things and get you into that. And that's, I think, if we were gonna start anywhere, this is probably the best place for getting a general idea, because I think a lot of the lessons you learn from learning Magic are applicable to a lot of other card games. But anyways, the point being of this part was that mid-range as a concept doesn't tend to stick around a lot in decks. Like early Hearthstone had a lot of mid-range decks, and early Magic had a lot of mid-range decks, where you just basically every turn you were playing like a guy that was as strong as it could be for how much resources you had, instead of like the aggregate plan where you're trying to play like a lot of little guys versus control deck where you have like kind of just removing your opponent's stuff and then like a bunch of big guys, or combo where you're like just like specifically looking for one interaction. Like the game plan of playing like like consistently over time kind of gets swamped out as power levels of cards get better. And that's just, I think, a factor of these games being so long lasting, is that like in order to get consumers to actually engage with new cards that they make, because as they keep updating, they want people to buy the new stuff, they have to make them more interesting or more complex. Mind you, I don't know about have to. I think especially nowadays, like, you can get away with a lot with just like changing aesthetics rather than game balance so much. But especially, I mean, this has already literally happened, so it doesn't matter. As they've gotten older, like the new cards are much more complex than anything that came out earlier. So then, as they tend towards like this kind of like gameplay complexity, this kind of straightforward. I mean, they're all kind of straightforward in fundamentally, but like this doesn't have a specific strength like over any of the other ones. Like it's kind of in the middle, so it does all of these a little bit. Kind of gets crowded out by decks that do one thing specifically really well. And so then as card quality rises, it becomes much easier to do those things specifically really well. In these games at least, and then most other games that I can think of. So that's how you end up with this situation where it is just like these three. And that doesn't, I guess, isn't super relevant to your understanding of the existing things, but I thought it was interesting to think about, just because from an interaction standpoint, I think this is probably the easiest to explain, because a lot of the way that these three things play comes from understanding the dynamic between them. Whereas like in a mid-range deck, and this is how a lot of simple starter decks are, you kind of just like have cards and then you try to play them every turn, like as much as you can. And just hope that like that works out. I think it's easy to explain because there's not as much like game planning for like how to interact with a specific opponent, because you just have this line, to follow. So then a lot of the time when we get into a new game, like we will both be playing decks that are basically just like this. Usually leaning more one way or the other. Like they'll either be like here, here, or here, but as a general rule, things tend to be more towards the center part to begin with, which is kind of scummy, I think, for games that are very specifically based around being not necessarily newcomer friendly, but definitely targeted towards card game enthusiasts like Flesh and Blood or whatever. I think when they give out, which not another deck I'll probably get you to play, to be honest. I think they should be built more towards like having specifically strong decks towards archetypes. Anyway, that's completely irrelevant. Target audience shit. Basically, I think it could also be interesting if decks were like just good at everything. Like if every deck was like a circle here. Um, wow, this is also not relevant, but it was fun and I thought about it. So this I think is also super interesting, but only if it's only balanced. Um, if that's like the idea, like on purpose, and if everyone has the access to being able to do all these things. Because like for example, there was a deck last season in Hearthstone that was like this, where they had very strong aggro options, very strong control options, and very strong combo options, and like that game is not built around being able to do that because nobody else had all three of those at the strength levels that this deck did. Um, and that was just super like horrible to play against because it would be like if you had strong control tools to like beat aggro, then they would just play, you know, something else, and then your stuff wouldn't be so good, and they would still be good at doing something different. Um, and it's just yeah, really awful, and very uninteractive because they just pick whatever you're bad at and then just do that. Because as a general rule, right, like this is the strongest dichotomy. So like usually these two will be the majority of like what you're playing, and that will go against each other. Um, but as far as this triangle goes, like generally speaking, combo will be control, control will be aggro, and aggro will be combo. Um, just because of how you see these like I should have made a combined graph, but basically the way that these line up, like you're trying to stop them from as a controlled player, you're trying to stop them from being powerful early, but the combo deck doesn't care about that. They just want to get to their point, and usually a lot of your removal cards are kind of useless. So then you end up not being able to influence the game a lot until you get here, and by that time they've probably put a lot of resources into getting to their really strong point, and then it doesn't matter. Versus here, a lot of your as a control player against aggro, like a lot of your resources are about shutting down their stuff, like slowing the game down. So then you're generally pretty well equipped to try to deal with like them going really fast early. Um, and then as an aggro player against a combo player, like because they're not necessarily geared defensively, but more towards like reaching a point, there's a lot less likelihood that they have access to resources to slow you down enough to stop you from just killing them. And like this is a very, I think, well established like triangle. So like there's a lot of like everyone like if you play the games, you will like know this. So then you would have like build your aggro deck to be able to like attack control more. If you know that that's more common or whatever. That doesn't matter. Why am I explaining this? That's more for like meta gaming, which like is not relevant for the two of us. But anyway, um, from my perspective, when I was trying to tell you about the decks that I was enjoying in Hearthstone recently, there's two specific ones that I played a lot last month. That was a mage deck that revolved around playing a bunch of different spells, and then you had one card that gave you a lot of damage based on how many different kinds of spells you played. So your game plan was like kind of controlling to slow the game down so that you could play all these different kinds of spells. So like there's a lot of removal, and like you're generally playing like a control deck early, but then you kind of don't have the late game options, so you're not like super powerful like at your top peak here, at your like plateau, but you use this spot to try to like draw and like get yourself in a resource position to be able to do your combo, so you're really strong like on this one turn, and then the game kind of ends because either you kill them with the combo or you don't, and then you kind of run out of stuff. And then Odin War is kind of the same thing, which was this deck that I was playing where basically it follows the same kind of curve where you have a lot. Basically, you want to slow the game down so that you get to a point where you can play one big impactful card, and then that effect. It's not as one turn as this one is. Like you want to have like one really strong turn here, whereas this one you just want to like slow down so that you can play this guy, and then going on from that, because of his effect, you kind of just like are very powerful for the rest of the game, and you try to win off that. And I think I liked both of these decks a lot because I like the controlling game plan because like as we discussed earlier, like this feels like the most interactive, um, like a gameplay sense. Like a lot of strictly combo decks generally feel very like you don't really care what your opponent's doing because you're just trying to do your own thing. And aggro is the same thing, but your own thing is like more, smacking people than like drawing cards. um, when did I start growling? Jesus. I like the interaction that being a more controlling deck where you're trying to slow down the game and like, play things and like have impact on the board. Sorry. I think I enjoy that because it just feels like you're actually playing the game rather than, I'm sorry, that's probably really loud. Than like just playing solitaire, like doing your own thing, basically. This is why I hate Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that game basically is just that. um Whereas like my problem with a lot of control decks is that it can feel very like I should just stay here. That because you just get to this point and then you're quite strong or whatever, it doesn't feel like you have like a defined win condition all the time. Like a lot of the time, winning for a control deck is just getting to a point where your opponent just doesn't have the resources to do anything. Like, they will draw a card, play the card, then it's your turn. You draw a card, you use it, you remove their card using one of yours, and then you just pass, and that kind of goes back and forth. So it's a game state where I guess you are still interacting, but it's just so slow. Like for example, I was playing a Magic deck the other day that was very much that kind of deck where I had a lot of removal spells and like I was basically just trying to like destroy all my opponent's stuff so that they were just like down to a few cards, and whenever they played something, I had the resources to just destroy it. And then because I'm spending a lot of my mana and cards on removing their stuff, like the stuff that I'm actually putting on to play is generally quite weak. So like I'm doing 2 damage every turn, so then it takes like 8 turns for me to finish the game, and that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's just I like the combo part at the end, at the big spike that both of these have. I mean, this one is literally a combo, but this is like not as much, but it still has that game plan where you have like this big spike turn, and then after that, that's like you try to win from there, like this big moment. And I think that's much more just enjoyable because it's a big cool thing that you're doing. Like that's why I think combo decks are like, even when they're not interactive, people who are playing them really like enjoy playing them because you get to do the big cool thing. You're like suddenly out of nowhere, I go bam, and you're just fucking dead. And that's really fun. Because it feels like awesome. So I think I really liked these because they were like, they had they had that big moment, like, and it doesn't always win you the game, right? But it puts you in a very strong position, and that turn feels really like that feels really cool, and like I enjoy that rather than like, the slow like grinding out where it's like you play a thing, I destroy your thing, go next. It's why I like fucking Priest and Hearthstone, man. Oh my god. That shit is like miserable. Because that deck is literally like, fuck all of this shit. It just like, it's not even, it gets to this point and then it just goes on forever. Like, it's the whole game plan. It's just to like get to a point where you have infinite resources to remove your opponent's stuff. But then like, because you're spending all your resources removing shit, you don't have a lot to put on the board yourself. So then it takes fucking forever. Just a very miserable experience. That's why I don't like it, being too balanced towards this or this or this, because like they're all kind of dog shit when everything's like climatized around here, but because of like just fucking cards getting stronger and more complex over time so that people will actually spend money on getting the new shit, right? Like these points all get like really powerful because like you know, you get like one really strong combo card at some point, and then another one like later, and then eventually there's enough really strong combo cards that this just becomes really powerful up here and like here, and that kind of kills this whole middle bit. And mind you, most decks are usually like, you know, like here, like they'll have elements of like ish, because then if you're playing this and someone's playing a deck that counters like specifically this, you want to have a little bit of something else to be able to like maybe have a chance. But for the most part, when it gets very polarized towards these points, like it's just fucking miserable, because aggro and combo at their best are very uninteractive, and control at its best is just way too fucking interactive. Like, at least if you're gonna like play something controlling, have a point where you play something fucking huge and the game's over. Like, make it end, man. That's kind of what I was looking for with like the magic stuff. Did I put this here somewhere? Oh yeah. Like, I think there was a few decks that I tried at this Pauper like evening that I've been going to, and the control decks just felt very like, you know, I just explained it actually, literally tell the story, but they all felt like, not all, but like they felt like that, where it was like a lot of very slow grinding play, and like it was fun to interact with shit. It was just like this end part here was very unsatisfying. And then I played a more aggressive deck as well, and that was just like fucking mindless. It was like, I don't know, that's just so whatever, man. I mean, that's fun because the end is really quick. Like, you know, it's like you have this much fun and it just lasts like there and then it's done. Whereas like these longer games with the control decks and stuff, it's like fun while it's happening, but then this end part can take like it can be pretty quick, or it could be really long. And like the longer it gets, it like, you know, the fun goes like because it's like, fuck, just let it be over, man. Like, oh god. Anyway. So like the aggro deck is less fun, but it's quicker. So, and then this one is more fun, but like the tail end is just miserable. That's why I like this plan here, because, you know, as far as fun goes, like the interacting here is like, I can just draw a line here. Like it's like, this is fun, and then it kind of plateaus out a bit earlier than like the actual resources do, because, you know, after a while of interacting, like the problem with the control decks is I actually want to do something, but we're building towards that, right? So we get to here and it's like, whoa, that's fucking sick, and then hopefully we're just done. And that's the end, you know? It doesn't fucking go on forever, like, so this is gonna be confusing, but it doesn't, like, you know, control deck would be like, it's fun, and then it's like, cool, okay, can we fucking end, please, you know? It's nice to have a fucking very pronounced win condition to build towards. And I think, you know, the difficulty in finding a deck that works like this is that a lot of the time, if the control tools are too good, then this can't really exist, because to get to this, like, if there's a deck that gets to this point against a control deck and the control tools are too good, this won't actually win you the game. So then there's no really point. So there's no reason to play this. So those decks kind of just don't exist. Or alternatively, if the combo tools are too good, there's like no reason to do this part. You just want to like go quick as possible to up here to do this, to just end. And again, like playing the combo is really fun, but playing against the combo is really miserable. And I don't think that games should be like a zero-sum enjoyment kind of thing. You know, like if I'm having a ton of fun, I don't want you to have like the equal amount of negative fun. I think it should be like, you know, you have a little bit of fun and I have a lot of fun, or like vice versa, or whatever, or we both have like a medium amount of fun, is hopefully the idea. And I think being able to interact kind of promotes that, because it feels like you all have your own chances to like play your cards and actually like do things. But you know, you don't want to over interact, because then it kind of drags and you're like, okay, like can we wrap this up, man? Like especially in a multiplayer game, like these games don't have the depth to be engaging for this fucking long, man. Sometimes they do, honestly. Like there's always outliers, but like as a general rule, like it just shouldn't go this fucking long because it's just mind numbing and kind of boring. And I think that's good because like if it was super deep, like if a game is like too fucking deep with mechanics and like things going on, it's like very hard to one get people into it in the first place because there's so much to learn, um, too much to learn, and additionally, like it's being endlessly deep makes it very hard to feel like you're playing well sometimes. Like it, you know, as much as it feels good to do cool things, it also feels really good if you are just executing whatever you're doing, like in a way that you feel is like not optimal necessarily, but like playing good and like doing things in a way that you're supposed to like have an impact. So yes, all this to say that like a lot of these games aren't designed to be like super super deep because it just turns off new players and then it takes a long time to invest in and then it makes the game super long, which makes it hard to commit the time to. So I am not, even though I'm saying I don't like aggro decks and like decks and combo decks that are kind of uninteractive and end like really quick up here. I also don't want things to go out forever. I like really like the game plan of having like interaction early to like actually do things. And like sometimes this doesn't necessarily have to be like just removing your opponent's stuff. It could also be a deck that where you like play your own things and they like further you towards this, but they are not strong enough that you can just focus on going straight here. It's just to like be able to play on the board and like interact. But then having a point where it's like, okay, I've accumulated the resources to be able to do this big thing and try to end the game like that. Um, yeah, because I think it gives both players a chance to actually like play the game. And it still lets you do really cool big things. And yeah, mind you, this is all my opinion. And like honestly, when we play things together, like you may find that you completely disagree and you just really love playing aggro and like rushing me in the face and trying to like end really fast, or the opposite where you just want to like torture me forever and grind out this fucking horrible bullshit. But like, because it is personal preference. Otherwise, I think there'll be more action done about this. Because lots of people complain about aggro, lots of people complain about people complain about fucking everything in a card game because there is 3 points, and generally speaking, people have like one big preference, and so they hate the other two. Um, but in order to capture like a large segment, like market, a large market segment, you kind of if you do all three of these, you get players from all of them, but they just complain about the other stuff, but they still play the one they like. Um, yeah, just that. I like something that looks like this. And I don't know what that is in a lot of games, and partially that's probably from just like if I played them more, I would have a better understanding of that. But it is kind of hard to jump into that because to learn, you end up getting put into one of these three a lot because that's like the majority of what's out there, and it's just like a lot of the time it just kind of sucks. Yeah, cool. I think that's everything. I hope I explained that well. And if there's anything that I am missing out on, feel free to let me know, because I'm happy to go into more detail or talk about something else. Uh, yeah, probably another video because this is just a much more long-lasting and then easier to refer back to kind of format. But yeah, okay, see ya.